Hello there. I just wanted to look at the Countess of Chester Hospital neonatal unit mortality statistics across a range of time prior to the indictment period and also post the indictment period. The first document to look at is the Freedom of Information Request response made to Wali Aslam. He made his request on the 22nd of September 2018, and this is the document he received back, the information he received back, which most people have been using since last year, since last late summer, autumn, in terms of the alleged statistics of deaths on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. And you can see that on the screen now, it's got it broken into years from 2013 to 2018. We've got these two higher years for the early neonatal deaths, 8 and 7 deaths in 2015 and 2016 respectively. If you look at the total of deaths, all deaths column, if you added up 2013 and 2014, you come to 33. And those are the 2 years prior to this indictment period, although the indictment period is often stated as June 2015 to June 2016, but for my purposes I want to include the full 2 years. I don't see why you wouldn't do that unless you were trying to frame someone, which is exactly what they've done. Anyway, that aside for the moment, the total number of deaths for 2015-2016 is 36, so that's only 3 more deaths in terms of all deaths from the prior 2 years, albeit there is a rise in early neonatal deaths. But we'll see in subsequent documents shown in this video that I'm making today that there's contradictions to this Freedom of Information request info that the hospital supplied to Wali Aslam in 2018. You can't rely on any of the figures they're giving you, really, unfortunately, which is an awful thing. Breaking it down now it goes into a month by month. So taking 2015, as you see here, one of the problems here, one obviously identifiable problem, is the lack of a figure in August 2015 or October 2015 in the early neonatal column as a death, because we know that there were deaths in this month because they ended up as murder charges and murder convictions, but both the early and the late neonatal deaths column is 0. So what's happened here? I've talked about this in a previous video. Either they've been missed off completely, or they've been accidentally on purpose or very deliberately miscoded, wrongly coded as stillbirths, as there are figures in August 2015 and October 2015 in the stillbirths column, 2 in each, as you see there. It's the second column along from the left. I want to consider now Stuart Gillam's excellent video that he made about a month ago, which is entitled, I'll put the link below, Why Did the Death Stop? And in brackets it says they didn't really, because it's contending Dr. Gibbs's claim that there was only 1 death in 7 years after Lucy Letby was, well, initially put into an admin role and then suspended and then obviously wrongly charged for crimes that didn't occur. So he made the statement that there was 1 death in 7 years post Lucy Letby leaving the unit which would have been at the beginning of July 2016. Well, we know there was 1 death in August of 2016. I'll go back to the other screen here. In August of 2016, there's a death in August. In the late neonatal column. So there's 1 death the very next month after Lucy Letby has gone on to admin duties. So is that the death he's talking about? But if that's not the death he's talking about, there are other deaths. So going back to the Wali Aslan request, which, as I said, is the main one that people have been using and basing their articles or videos on since last year, or Substack articles and so forth, is that we can see in 2017 there are 4 deaths, 2 early neonatal and 2 late neonatal. In 2018 we've got 2 there. So that's that. So that obviously contradicts. It obviously contradicts what Dr. Gibbs is saying, doesn't it? Because we're already up to 7 post Lucy Letby leaving. In the Stuart Gillam video, he goes a few years further on, and that there are some extra deaths in 2019. I'm still waiting to get a Freedom of Information request back to get my own records of that from them, or the evidence from the CoCH about that, in terms of how many deaths they say happened in 2019. There's all kinds of stats coming back from different sources and different directions. In the Stuart Gillam video, he looks at the Embrace data, which is very interesting indeed, and that suggests that there were a number of deaths. I'll say why it suggests in a minute, rather than that there were. It suggests that there were a number of deaths subsequent to Lucy Letby leaving, and you have to remember as well that the level had been brought down to a level 1. So Gibbs's statement about only 1 death in 7 years, you need to, even if that is the case, which it doesn't seem to be the case at all, the stats being given to people and the Embrace data say differently. So why is he saying that? But the issue with the Embrace data, the problem with that is, because I ended up sending an email to them, the problem with going by Embrace data is that Embrace is all about the figures shown in Embrace, and it's a brilliant video. I'm not knocking it in any way at all that Stuart's done, but the limitations of Embrace data is that it doesn't concern itself with where the death occurred. It's only basing it on where the birth was. So they look at the raw data for how many births there were in any 1 year, and then they get filtered back to them deaths wheresoever they happened. And they're looking at the number of deaths in comparison to the number of live births that there were in any 1 year, but they're not stipulating where the death happened. So if the Embrace data says a certain number of deaths happened in a certain year, they're not explicitly stating. I'll read out the response to the email that I sent to Embrace. I'll read that out in a minute. I'm just reading now an email that I had from Ian Gallimore of the Embrace organisation, which also deal with mortality statistics, but they do it in a very particular way. His response is as follows. Hi Mark, we report neonatal deaths by place of birth, not place of death. The neonatal mortality rates for a trust are based on the deaths of babies who were born there and who may or may not have died there. This is because the calculation of mortality rates requires a denominator common to all births and not just the babies who died. Reporting by place of death would require a counterfactual denominator for babies who didn't die, i.e. where they would have died if they had died. Clearly this isn't possible. However, we can look at all babies born in a location and compare it to the numbers of babies born in that location who subsequently died, including those who died elsewhere, as we have a place of birth for all those babies. As many neonatal deaths are the result of things that happen during pregnancy or birth, this isn't an unreasonable approach. So for any trust, the numbers reported are of babies born there, irrespective of where they died. If the baby only died there, he or she is not included in that trust's numbers. Right, so a baby could be born elsewhere and could die at a particular trust, but it wouldn't be included in the embrace figures there. So it's all about where babies are born for embrace figures. And going back to the reduction of the level to a level 1 in the beginning of July 2016, clearly any babies that were born at the Countess of Chester Hospital who were premature, who were less than 32 weeks gestation, they would immediately have to be transferred to a level 2 or level 3 unit, depending on what other conditions they have and how high the acuity of their need was. So they would have been transferred out, whereas in the years before that they would have been taken into the unit in the building, because it was operating as a level 2 unit, even though it shouldn't have been, clearly. So the embrace, what I'm getting at here is that to use the embrace data, it could give a suggestion of something, but it's not conclusive because we really don't know. And it's a really useful tool that if you look at Stuart's video, you can go by year and go by trust and look at the raw data or adjusted data. You can look at the raw data and say that of those numbers of live births across the whole year, this number of babies reported as dying, sadly dying, this number of stillbirths, etc. But unfortunately, we can't draw anything conclusive from it, because I would think that most of those babies died elsewhere, but I don't know. And here we have the further conundrum, because if we go back to the Wally Aslan FOI, which I'll call up again, I've got all these different tabs up. In 2017 we've got these 4 deaths, and in 2018 we've got 2 noted there. So we've got 6 there already, and we know we've got an August 2016 death. So, you know, despite what Dr. Gibbs says, even the hospital says that there were at least 7 deaths going up to only 2018. I've asked for, I've done an FOI for up to 2022. I've not had the response yet. They've really slowed down in responding. Maybe they're getting a lot of FOIs. But there's some really odd stuff to come in this video that, in terms of what they have sent me about other years. So I don't know if I can go further with that in terms of the embrace data, because it's just, we can't track it to places of death, and that's what's crucial here. Something that Stuart says in the video is that he compares the embrace data to this Wally Aslan FOI, which is up on the screen now, which show in 2017 there are 4 deaths, for example. And Stuart says, well, it may be higher in here, because I think on the embrace it says 3 rather than 4. It may be higher on here because the deaths shown on this FOI, Wally Aslan, might include deaths that happened elsewhere when they've been transferred out. And this is another strong area of contention that I've been trying to get to the bottom of. It would seem to me to be the only logical thing would be to code a death where and when it happens, i.e. in what hospital it happens and in what month it happens. Going back to the missing deaths in 2015, where there should be a death showing in August 2015 and in October 2015, and there's zeros there, people were saying some months ago on Twitter and other places that there was some, I never saw any foundation for this or any formal justification for it, but it was going round that people were assuming that they were coding deaths in the month based on the month of birth. In other words, a baby would die in, let's say in July, but because they'd been born at the end of June, they would code the death in June. That never made sense to me. It seems to me completely illogical. And I did have a response back as yet another freedom of information request from the hospital, in which they stated very clearly that the death should be coded as happening in the months that they occurred, which is really the only thing that makes sense, isn't it? And not in the month of the baby's death if it was the month before, or even a different month, an earlier month. So they've given me confirmation that the deaths should be recorded and coded as deaths happening in the month that they happen. The second part now is location. It would seem absolutely irrational, wrong, and it wouldn't make any sense to me whatsoever. It doesn't to me. To say that a death happens elsewhere and the hospital codes it as happening there, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I don't think that is what's happening. I just think these statistics are all over the shop. I think they're just playing fast and loose with them, or they're just so poorly recorded or misrecorded, and early neonatal deaths are being recorded as stillbirths, which we know is a problem in the NHS as a whole. They shouldn't be doing it. They're doing it for the purposes of fiddling their statistics, essentially, to show how many deaths happen. It's part of a corrupt process, a corrupted process, and that may or may not have been happening here, or have they missed the deaths out altogether. But either way, whether they miscoded this August and October 2015 death, which ends up as a murder charge, it must add necessarily another 2 deaths to the full year total. So we end up with 19 deaths, from which Lucy Letby is charged with 7. So as I've said in multiple previous videos, the preponderance of deaths that happen on that ward, 12 across those 2 years, which is a relative spike from the 2 years prior in terms of early neonatal and late neonatal, were never laid at Lucy Letby's door, as it were. Were never part of the indictment. Moving on now, I'm dotting about a bit, but moving on now to an email exchange I had with a very kind person who emailed me in relation to some videos that I'd done previously, and in relation to they want to remain anonymous, so I'm going to anonymise them, as it were. I won't mention any names, but they'd they'd made a complaint to the BBC after seeing the Panorama programme in terms of the reporting there, which they felt was fallacious, and I'll read through their complaint, but I will take out all the names and so forth in a bit. But they also received from the hospital what you can see on the screen now, which is the result of a freedom of information request here, in which we've got even a new set of figures. They asked for figures between 2013 to 2022. I'll have to find a way to reduce this down. 2013 to 2022, and if we can, the figures don't match up to the figures in the Wally Aslan 2018 FOI. They don't match up with them. So for example, as you'll see here, year 2013, NND in-house, neonatal deaths in-house, that must mean. It says 2 there for 2013, but in the Wally Aslan one, we've got a total actually of 6 deaths. We've got 3 early neonatal, 1 late neonatal, and 2 post-neonatal. In respect to post-neonatal deaths, I can only assume that those post-neonatal deaths happened in that neonatal unit. Otherwise, why are they coded for this hospital? Where else are they going to occur? What other department are they going to occur? And we know that post-neonatal babies were being treated on that unit, were being looked after there, because we know one of the babies on the indictment, I think it's baby G, who came into the indictment in terms of 3 separate attempted murder charges, was 100 days old. That puts that baby well into the post-neonatal period, i.e. post 28 days. So we've got early neonatal 0 to 7, late neonatal goes up to 28 days, post-neonatal is post 28 days. So we've got these different reporting. So the person that I've been interacting with, emailing with, was sent this information. There's a total of 2. In 2018 they said there were 6. In 2014 they said there's a total of 3, and that's in that gentleman's request quite recently. But in the 2018 Wali Aslan FOI, there's a total of 4. So there's so many differences here. But what have we got for some of the later years here then? What have we got for some of the later years here? 2017, it says 0. It says 0 for that. And yet in the FOI request in 2017, made in 2018, 2017 figures show 4. So you just can't trust. So which one's right? So we can't trust any of this information at all. But just to go through, because this is the only document I've seen from the CoCH as a result of an FOI with later years. So they state in 2018 there was 0, whereas in the Wali Aslan request 2018 shows 2 deaths. So that's another disparity. In 2019 they said there was 1 death. 2020 0, 2021 0, and 2022 0. So this document here that was received by the person that I've been emailing with about their BBC complaint, this matches pretty well with what Dr. Gibbs is saying. This matches perfectly with it, whereas the previous FOI made in 2018 doesn't match with it at all. And the embrace figures, while they can't be conclusively... You've got to remember, I don't know if I've said this already, maybe I'll just repeat it. The embrace figures they're not determined by place of death, they're determined by place of birth. And because the unit had been reduced to a level 1, many of the babies that would have been high acuity and very premature would have been transported immediately out to another unit that was not a level 1, i.e. it would have been a level 2 or level 3 unit, and CoCH was no longer looking after babies which were less than 32 weeks premature, whereas prior to July 2016 they were right down to 27 weeks. I want to go back before 2013 now. I sent an FOI request asking for the mortality figures for the neonatal unit at Countess of Chester Hospital from 2005 to 2012. And the email I had back wasn't very satisfactory. But they did send me this document, if you can call it that. And I did ask them to break everything down into all the different sections, i.e. early neonatal, late neonatal, stillbirth, late fetal loss, post-neonatal, and all deaths, i.e. to copy, to emulate the Wally Aslan 2018 FOI, from which most people have been working from, as it were, since last year. As you can see on the screen, this is the information they sent me, and they said in the email, this is all we have for these years, 2010 to 2012. I'll get on to the earlier years in a bit, because my request was 2005 to 2012. This is all they sent me. So they say there was 1 death in 2010. There were 3 deaths in 2011 and 3 in 2012, which aligns with the story that we've been told about the average rate of deaths at this unit, for which 2015 and 2016 there was an uptick in deaths. Although if you include all deaths, including the stillbirths, then the pictures is a bit more complicated, really, in terms of the fluctuation, how to look at that kind of fluctuation, because those stillbirths go from very high, dropping down to very low, back to very high again. But so I asked for them to split it up into all the categories, but this is all they could give me. And as you can see, it's in the same format as the person that I've been interacting with by email received his information. And that information that he received is obviously, there's a great disparity between the information that he received and the Wally Aslan FOI, which is the main one, where it's split up into months and all the categories, which I showed at the beginning. So on that basis, I don't trust these figures at all. They're telling me that's all the figures they have for these 3 years. But it gets worse, because, as I say in my FOI request, I asked for 2005 to 2012 to get a sense over a longer period of time what was happening. And their response to me was that between 2005 and 2009, that aspect of my request, they hold no data whatsoever. I'll repeat that because it's quite shocking to me, and it's quite shocking to my friend who I talked to about this, who has worked in the NHS for the best part of 3 decades, very involved in things like coding departments and so on and so forth. The idea that this hospital has no data for deaths that occurred between 2005 and 2009. And for all I know, before that, they've got nothing either. I don't know. But it was, as part of my request, those 4 years, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9... No, that's 5 years, sorry. Those 5 years, they're saying there's nothing. We've got nothing there. Now, I would have thought it would have been a statutory requirement to have those deaths. So where is that information? So that's what I've done. I'm doing this video now because I don't know how long it's going to take for them to get back to me, because I wrote back to them and I said, well, where is that information? Who's got that? Who's got those statistics then? I said, did you lose them? Did you wipe them? Did you send them to someone else? If so, who is that someone else? Where are they? How can I get them? And that's where we're at the moment. That's where I'm at in terms of, I've not heard back from them since sending that supplementary email to them to say, well, it's not good enough. I want to know what those years say and why you haven't got that data at all. I think we're getting the picture, aren't we, that the recording of deaths at the Countess of Chester neonatal unit, and for all we know, possibly in other neonatal units across the country, is not reliable. It's contradictory depending on when you ask for it. It's a complete the dog's dinner really a basket case, or in terms of data, that is. I know it's about very serious and awful, tragic losses for people, but just in terms of their recording duties, it's a complete mess, isn't it? Very contradictory, very unreliable. Deaths that we know happened because they end up as murder charges, not appearing at all. Contradictory figures. A statement from the senior consultant which is contradicted by the FOI figures. And in terms of the Stuart Gillam's video, yes, the embrace, it's suggestive of it that there were these deaths there. Obviously it says it in black and white in terms of the FOI that there were 4 deaths in 2017. I'll just check that. 2017 4 deaths, and then 2018 2 deaths. But the trouble is with the embrace is that they don't stipulate the place of death, and if there were some very premature babies born at the Countess of Chester Hospital post the downgrading of the unit to level 1, then they would have necessarily been moved out through the transport team, or they should have been. They should have been. But this is the conundrum. But why have we got 4 deaths showing in 2017 then? For a level 1 unit. So we've got more deaths showing, according to the Wally Aslan FOI, in 2017 when the units are level 1 and they've got daily consultant ward rounds, and they've got fewer cots and more spaces, and they're a level 1 unit. They're not taking any babies of less than 32 weeks gestation as they were before. And there's more deaths happening in 2017 according to their statistics, or they're an equal amount as 2014 when they were a level 2, which is the year before the first year including the indictment period, 2015. There were 4 deaths in 2014. So you've got the same amount, even though it's been reduced down to a level 2 unit, which again, obviously, as Stuart Gillam says in his video, obviously it contradicts the claim made not only by Dr. Gibbs, but reported by the media as a whole, that all the deaths stopped when Lucy Letby was no longer on the ward. But we know there was a death the very next month, in 2016, in August, because it says it in their statistics. But then everything's got to be caveated that can we rely on any of these statistics whatsoever? You can see it's a mess, can't you? I want to read through now an email exchange with someone who saw one of my previous videos and very kindly emailed me with their complaint they made to the BBC, and they want to remain anonymous, but I'll read through the email exchange we've had, or rather the BBC responses and the original complaint made, redacting certain parts. But I was sent this email by a kind person who says the following: I'm forwarding a copy of a BBC response. Oh no, is that the beginning of it? Sorry, no, I need to go back to the beginning here. So this was the complaint that was made. It says here at 54 minutes in the Panorama programme, this is the complaint. It was stated that, quote, we've discovered that 13 babies died during Lucy Letby's last year on the neonatal unit. She was on duty for every one of them, close quote. So that's what it said, apparently, in the Panorama. And the complainer, who's my correspondent, said to the BBC in this complaint, I feel an explanation needs to be given as to why this statement has been included, particularly as the prosecution's expert witness had previously stated that he had ruled out remaining deaths as being expected and from the, quote, usual causes, close quote. Lucy Letby left the unit in 2016, and the presenter later states that, quote, of Panorama, there There had only been one death in 7 years, close quote. So we know that's wrong as well, this BBC statement, don't we? Continuing to read the complaint made to the BBC. Figures obtained under the Freedom of Information Act show that this statement to be untrue. The impression is given that deaths virtually ceased after Lucy Letby was removed from the neonatal unit, but this is not the case. If stillbirths, which may include some early neonatal deaths, apparently, this person writes, it shouldn't do, are included, figures actually rose from 11 in 2016 to 15 in 2017, despite the fact that the unit had been downgraded and other improvements made. That's a very good point, isn't it? Even if the figures for stillbirths are accepted as accurate, there are at least 6 further deaths in 2017-18, with one in August 2016 after she'd been removed. Later figures have yet to be provided. So that's just really reiterating what I've been talking about thus far with this disparity between, obviously that comes up in Stuart Gillam's video, this disparity between the statement made by Dr. Gibbs and obviously picked up by Panorama and the BBC, that was only one death. It's obviously not the case unless they've got all their figures wrong and they're just making it up. I would ask that your response specifically address the inclusion of erroneous information in the programme in this way. The parents' request to have the upcoming Thirlwall inquiry live streamed have been refused, accompanied by a statement that the media will be the, quote, eyes and ears of the public with, quote, fair and accurate reporting, close quote. I feel it's incumbent on the BBC to ensure that these principles are strictly adhered to in its coverage of the inquiry, as I feel previous coverage of the case has been selective and biased against Lucy Letby and at times has failed to meet impartiality guidelines. This complaint has been submitted previously but appears to have been treated as the programme having been viewed on BBC rather than iPlayer. So what I did there was read out the complaint that my correspondent made to the BBC about the Panorama programme. And here is the first response, because there are 2 responses eventually from the BBC about that complaint. The first response is as follows. Dear, and then the name. Please accept our apologies for the delay in replying. The Panorama team have reviewed your complaint and have asked us to pass the following on to you. Right. And then it quotes part of that. It quotes part of the complaint and it gives the explanation as follows. The fact that there were 13 baby deaths on a unit that was accustomed to 2 or 3 per year in the context of the Lucy Letby is significant information. See, that's a misdirection straight away, isn't it? Because it suggests it's trying to say there were 13 in 1 year. Well, we've got to look at the full years, haven't we? We've got to include that as 2 full years, haven't we? As opposed to compare. But the figures are wrong anyway. The figures are wrong because I think they're up to at least 19 deaths. But Panorama and the BBC and obviously the Countess of Chester Hospital don't care how many deaths there were. Because they're not talking about full calendar years. They're going across these 2 years to pick up the most deaths on either side of 6 months either side of Christmas. So none of it makes sense to me. The response for the BBC goes on as follows. The question of how many of these deaths Lucy Letby was present for is also significant. If, for sake of argument, Lucy Letby had not been present for any of the 6 deaths that weren't included in the trial, this fact would be potentially significant and may be taken by some critics to weigh against the prosecution case. The fact that she was present for 5 of these 6 additional deaths is significant for much the same reason. Well, I don't agree with that at all, because if they're deemed not suspicious, then it's not relevant, is it? It's not relevant at all. But this is what we're up against with the BBC, and obviously the prosecution, and the whole affair is just poisoned by this wrong-headed thinking or this distorted thinking. Why is it significant? Why would it be significant if even a nutter like Evans has decided there hasn't been deliberate harm there, and he wants to put every death at Lucy Letby's door, but even those ones he couldn't do. But the BBC are making out that it's significant and says something about Lucy Letby. So you're dealing with very dangerous people here, I feel, in the BBC. It goes on to say, your question about the number of neonatal deaths at the counters, and they've got the figures wrong as well, but they don't care about that. They don't care how many deaths there were across the full 2 years at all. Your question about the number of neonatal deaths at CoCH since July 2016 is a good one. It's something that we investigated ourselves. Oh, right, did you? A Freedom of Information request from 2018 indicates more than one neonatal death at the counters Chesterfield since 2016, and that must be the Wally Aslan one that everyone's referred to since last year. It records that there were 2 early neonatal and 2 late neonatal in 2017, and 2 further early neonatal deaths in 2018 indeed, so that's that 6 we've been talking about. We asked the Countess of Chester Hospital about this. This is the BBC saying, speaking still, and they told us that their 2018 Freedom of Information figures were incorrect. So they say that they were incorrect. So in what way were they incorrect? Everybody's been using that as the basis for what the stats were, and the BBC now say that the Chester Hospital have told the BBC that those figures are incorrect. They explained that the data used to compile these figures sat across various platforms. What on earth does that mean? And that a manual check conducted in 2023 confirmed that the 2018 figures were wrong. They told us, we've only got the BBC's word for this, and the NHS's word. It's a complete mess, isn't it? There were, they told us, no neonatal deaths from the 1st of July 2016 to the 31st of December 2018. So they're saying that there wasn't a death in August then. This is how insane it is. This is how I don't believe that. Why should we believe them now? Why should we believe them, this nonsense about figures sitting across various platforms? What on earth does that mean? What does that mean? And the BBC's response, I mean, this is what the BBC are saying the Countess of Chester Hospital told them, that we're not to rely on the 2016 to 2018 figures in the original FOI, and that there were no neonatal deaths. So where did all those other figures come from? And what does it mean, sitting across various platforms? How could they possibly get there? How would they be made up to get there? And if they're saying, well, here's the thing, you see, if they're saying that those later years were all incorrect and all wrong, why are we and how are we to believe the figures for 2015 and 16, or indeed 2013 and 14? Because that FOI request in 2018, which is what they're referring to here, because they keep saying it, the 2018 figures, what they mean by that is the 2018 FOI, that they say is wrong, and it's wrong for the years 2016 to 2018. Well, then why isn't it wrong for all the other years on there, going back to 2013? Of course, the BBC don't want to get into that, do they? And so the BBC continue, we understand there was only one death in the 7 years after Lucy Letby stopped working at the neonatal unit. So, who to believe and why would you believe them? Can't believe anything that the NHS is saying about these deaths. They claim not to have any data for deaths from 2005 to 2009. Or it just finishes off here with the BBC saying, we hope this addresses your concerns. Well, like hell it does. Thanks again for taking the time to contact us. Well, thank you. Yeah, great, BBC. And then my correspondent had a further response from the BBC, and I'll just look for that now and I'll read it out. So these responses from the BBC, based on the complaint made by the correspondent, my correspondent, who's then forwarded these responses to me. The first response came back from the BBC in September of 2024, and this extra one came back, which was not solicited by my correspondent, came back on the 19th of November 2024. Dear, and the name of the correspondent. This is a second response from the BBC about the original complaint made by my correspondent about the Panorama programme. And it says as follows: "Thanks for contacting us again about Panorama. Lucy Letby, the nurse who killed..." Well, they're not leading you there, are they? I suppose, well, it's post the trial, but you know where they're coming from, don't you? "Your continuing concerns were shared once again with the Panorama team, who responded as follows. This is our proposed 1B response." Weird. I'm reading the BBC response here. "This is our proposed 1B response." What does that mean? So the first one was 1A. This is 1B. They're having another crack at it, basically. Maybe because they're concerned about their reporting being filled with error, and that linking in a chain to the NHS reporting being full of error, i.e. the reporting of deaths and figures being full of error and all over the shop, about which the BBC don't seem to care, and make some weird excuse about deaths being listed on different platforms. It's all vague nonsense. Either way, can't rely on the NHS figures, can't rely on the BBC reporting of the NHS figures, can't rely on any of it. I'll continue reading this second response to the correspondent from the BBC. "Thank you for your email. In the years prior to 2015, which I've looked at as well, I've requested those as well, as you know. The annual death rate on the neonatal unit at the counters at Chesterfield was between 2 and 3. Here are the figures we have for years 2010 to 2014. And they list them as follows: 2010, 2 deaths; 2011, 2 deaths; 2012, 3 deaths; 2013, 2 deaths; 2014, 3 deaths. I'm just going to have a quick look to see how that matches up with my recent FOI for those years. So here we have yet another disparity. So this is what the BBC, the counters of Chester have told them recently. So this is a response coming back in November 2024. And they say for the years 2010 to 2012, just initially look at these, because these are the ones that I've had back from a separate FOI request made just a few weeks ago. 2010, 2 deaths. 2011, 2 deaths. 2012, 3 deaths. So that's the response that the BBC Panorama is telling my correspondent that the hospital told them. And yet, the FOI that I made has different figures. And I made that request just a few weeks ago. For those 3 years, I've got 1 death, 3 deaths, and 3 deaths. So, just to repeat that, for the response coming back from the BBC, which is allegedly coming from the NHS, for 2010 they've got 2 deaths, and my response says 1 that I had just the other week. 2011, 2 deaths, my response says 3. 2012, BBC says 3 deaths, my response says 3. So they get 1 out of 3 right. So you can see again, they're just picking a number. It's like they're dipping their hand into like the old tombola into a hat and looking for a number and unfolding the bit of paper and just telling people what a number is on it. Each report's different. Now, and this is about deaths of babies. You can see what a mess it all is. You can see what a mess the NHS is in terms of reporting and coding and getting accurate figures for deaths. It should be one of the most important things that they have statistics on, should it not? And just to repeat, they've got no data for between 2005 and 2009, so they tell me. None. As I said, I've asked them to tell me where that data is. Did they delete it? Did they lose it? Did they send it somewhere else? If so, where is that somewhere else? How can I get it? It's absolutely all over the shop. I'll just continue reading that response, that second response to my correspondent from the BBC. The increase in deaths to 13 between 2015 and 2016 is noteworthy in this context. You see, the way they phrase it is all wrong, because they're going across 2 years there. They should take each year by year. Everything else is like split up into separate years, and now they're jumping across this time frame of 2 years, aren't they? Rather than saying 7 and 8, they want to get the 13 figure out to you. But even that 13 figure's wrong. Even that 13 figure's wrong, because we've got these missing. Here's how muddy and ridiculous and all over the shop it is. That 13 figure they've obviously got from where? Where have they got that 13 figure? The BBC. They've got it from the 2018 FOI, which they're telling us now at the same time. They're telling us that at the same time they're telling us that. They've got that from that. And they're saying that all that information's incorrect, that the NHS told them that that's all incorrect. And all the figures were wrong. But they're still using them. But they're using them incorrectly because of these 2 missing deaths in October and August 2015. So they've not even noticed that disparity, and they don't care about it. It says here, the fact that Lucy Letby was on duty for 12 of these 13 deaths is significant for several reasons. Well, I'm not going to go over that again, because it's all specious nonsense by the absurd BBC, who wouldn't know the truth if it's... I won't say, you know what I mean. It wouldn't know the truth at all. It's a very dangerous organisation, I think. Dangerous to the truth. Yeah, it's just a repeat of the other thing. I'm not going to go over that, because it's the, you know, they're running along the line of, well, even though it didn't form part of the indictment, the fact that you're on duty. Well, who else was on duty for those other deaths? I can't go there again. It's just obscene. It's obscene. And then they say this concludes stage 1 of our complaints process. So BBC basket case, don't care about the actual details, using the figures fast and loose, that suits their purposes and backs up their programme and backs up their specious arguments about deaths that weren't on the indictment, making false suggestions about that. We've only got their word for it, that the hospital subsequently say the 2018 figures that were given in the Wali Aslan FOI are all incorrect. So that FOI has been out there all this time, that people have been using, and now, according to the BBC, the NHS have told them that all that's rubbish, all that's all wrong, and that therefore Gibbs is right when he says it's only 1 death. There's only 1 death since Lucy Letby left that unit, and we've got to take into account it was reduced to a level 1. But they're effectively saying that, well, just to begin with, there's no August 2016 death. It doesn't exist, because it was just, well, how did it get there? On what possible basis did they give that reporting in 2018 to the FOI? On what basis? Did they just make it up? Did they just, what did they do? I don't know if they'll ever respond to me about the 2005 to 2009 figures. I've asked them to. It's a complete basket case of reporting and unreliability, of reporting, of coding of deaths, i.e. that whether there were or were not deaths at certain times, and whether the deaths were stillbirths or early neonatal deaths. It's all over the shop, as you can see, and that's the mess we're in. And within that kind of mess, it doesn't surprise me that all this kind of mess of reporting and statistics is all part of this hideous miscarriage of justice. But that's where we are, and it's just another element of the horror show that's part of the backdrop of this miscarriage of justice against Lucy Letby, and also the well, they keep calling it suboptimal, but the clinically negligent treatment of many of those babies, and the clinical negligence that was involved there, and the failures of the trust as a whole to have a safe unit for those babies to go to, and it shouldn't have been operating at a level 2 at all. And that's what the story should have been about, but they invented the idea of a murderer to detract from that, to detract from all their failures. And that's where we are. It is indeed an absolute horror show. So I hope that was all right to follow that. But I don't know where to go with the statistics at the moment. You can't get the truth out of them, and they're just telling different people different figures at different times. It doesn't make sense to me at all. Throwing the BBC into the mix makes it a whole lot worse. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.